Hello everyone, I am Tessellating Hexagons, and you'd be forgiven for wondering why I'm uploading this now today, because if you've been with my channel for a while, you know that usually Tuesdays I just upload a Eurovision debate and leave it at that. Well, due to some technical issues, I thought maybe this week's Eurovision debate might not be able to go up in time. It probably still will be able to, but I already promised through Twitter that I'd be uploading this, so you get 2 videos today, so yeah. And I was thinking anyway that I should probably make a series out of this. Now, back in July, I gave that month's vlog completely over to just reviewing a book that I'd discovered and quite liked. And as you recall, that was Tristan Black Wolf's The Laputan Factor, and I can never reconcile how to pronounce that word, because whenever I say it, it kind of sounds like Laputin. I don't know, but I know the origin of the word, and I'm just hopeless with words, as that video actually proved, because I spent the entire video mispronouncing one of the main characters' names, and I was mixing up Ambrose Bierce Kovac with a hard k at the end with Tinkara Kovac from Eurovision, so I apologise for that. But yeah, I was wondering perhaps I should make a permanent fixture out of reviewing books, because after that review, well, about a month after that review went up, I got an email and a Twitter message and several other notifications, actually, from Tristan himself. He's seen the review. I'm having so many fanboy moments thinking about it even now. And partly as thanks for that review, he sent me another one of his books. Like, he bought and paid for it all himself and then sent it to me kind of like as a thank you present, or also slightly as a birthday present, because it was, well, close to my birthday at the time. And the point is, he sent me this, an earlier book of his, The Man with Two Shadows, and as it turns out, this particular copy was actually printed on my birthday. It didn't arrive until the 8th of August, but I won't complain, it's a really good book. Now, I don't want to sound as though I'm just perpetually going to fawn over absolutely anything Tristan writes, because he said to me in an email, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, but he trusts my judgment to, you know, if he ever writes something that's, like, bullshit, then he expects me to call him out on it, and I would. But as far as I know, he has yet to actually write anything that's worthy of criticism. I mean, I can see, in this book, there are moments that I think, this is hard to put into words, but you know how when you create something, whether it's as a writer, as an artist, or whatever, everyone else looks at it and approves of whatever it is you've created, but then you look at it and see a load of small details that you don't personally approve of. You think, oh, I should have done that better, oh, that's such a glaring mistake, and no one notices and no one cares, because they like it for the whole, rather than for all these little bits that actually aren't as bad as you think they are. I can see moments in this book that perhaps, having written it, one might pull oneself up on, but as a reader of this book that was published, you can't complain. There's like, I can't put this into words clearly enough, but there are moments that I think, having written it, one might have reservations about, but as a reader, there are no problems. I mean, there's the odd typo here and there, but that was true of the Laputan Factor as well. Like, there are about 2 or 3 across the entire pair of books, and I say pair of books, they're not actually, well, certainly, as far as one can extrapolate from reading the 2 books with no background knowledge, the 2 aren't connected in any particular way. They might be, but I don't know, I feel like it would take a fair amount of retconning and adjustment of reality, and it might even come across as lazy if he tried to directly connect this book's world with that of the Laputan Factor. But I've said a whole bunch of words without actually going into the story itself, and so I'll do with this what I did with the Laputan Factor and read out the blurb on the back and see if that gets you interested, and then I'll go into more detail about the story itself. And I don't know what it is about Tristan's literature, but I always find something that I don't know whether I'm pronouncing it right or not, and in this case, it's the main character, his first name's Jeremiah. I'm okay with that, unless I'm mispronouncing that as well, but I'm fairly sure it's Jeremiah. But his surname is spelled P-Y-M, and logically I'm thinking that should be pronounced Pim, but then my brain is like, but Tess, you know all these other languages where Y is pronounced differently, so what if it's Pum, or Pweem, or some other fantastic variation thereupon? And, I mean, there's at least one character of note in this book who, well, like, at least one notable recurring, like, almost omnipresent character in this book who is, I believe, of Russian heritage, and Russian is one of those languages that does the thing with the letter Y, and so I don't know if I'm saying it right, but I'm going to take a gamble and probably be as wrong as I was with Kovac's name, but I'm gonna pronounce it Pim and hope for the best. So I shall now read out the back of the book. But by the way, you can kind of see on the back there's a Chinese restaurant in the book. I don't remember the exact name, but it contains the words really good. Hang on, give me a moment to look it up, because I simply must. Here we go, it's the Really Good Chinese Restaurant and Grocery. And, like, that first of all, that works on two levels, because it does sound like a name that you'd have for a Chinese restaurant that also happens to be a corner shop or whatever, but it also gives them an excuse to put really good in huge letters on the back of the book, and that's very clever. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned, I don't think I have up to this point, cover art is by the hugely talented Selena Van, so do check her out. But yes, I shall read out the back of the book. Apart from really good in huge letters, and then what I can only assume is the Chinese for really good, or something to that effect, but okay. Have you ever felt uncomfortable in your own skin? Maybe there's a reason. Jeremiah Pym is a private detective, not the flashy gun-toting gumshoe of old, but a quiet, respectable Seamus of modern day who earns a modest living on domestic intrigues and background checks. After being hired for what should be a routine surveillance job, Jeremiah witnesses a kidnapping, barely escaping with his life. The next day, however, not a trace remains of any kidnapping, or anything else that he saw. Trying to put the puzzle pieces together leads the detective on a convoluted chase that brings into question everything that he's ever known about himself. With the help of his Native American mentor, Edgard Moonbear, Jeremiah discovers that the key to the mystery may be found in another world, a world where therianthropes, human-animal hybrids, are the sentient beings, and where hundreds of years of slow change has allowed some of these beings to wield magical powers. As Jeremiah learns the secrets of his own past, he comes to learn who and what he is, and why his existence is central to the continued survival of two worlds. Now, that in itself, as an introductory blurb, kind of summarizes in a really subtle way the differences that I've encountered between this and the Laputan Factor, because both are really good books, but in completely different ways, and so it's difficult to say one is better than the other, one is worse than the other. I will say, I think if I had to pick one, and I couldn't say neither or both, then I think the Laputan Factor is better, but only insofar as it was released, like this was released in like 2011, whereas Laputan Factor was 2015, as I recall. And so Tristan's had time to develop further as an author. Plus, it's a different kind of story, because the Laputan Factor, it doesn't rely on, well, it doesn't have to establish, like part of the mystery of the story, part of the story itself, comes from extrapolating the background from the information you're given. It's kind of all, not necessarily action-packed, but stuff is constantly happening in the Laputan Factor, whereas with this one, The Man with Two Shadows, it does take some time to build up, to set the scene, to establish the character, and that's not to its detriment, because, as I said, both books are different in their execution. Because, as I said, the Laputan Factor is kind of action-heavy, stuff constantly happening, the interest, the intrigue comes from, being rushed through in the moment, whereas with Man with Two Shadows, the interest comes from having a world established in front of you and then seeing where that goes. I understand the concept in my head, I'm just struggling to put it into words to explain. Hello, yes, I actually had an idea in post of how I can best describe what I'm trying to say. Between the Laputan Factor and The Man with Two Shadows, both books, they're paced differently, as I've been saying, and I think the appeal actually comes partly into, like, the appeal of the pacing and the appeal of the writing both hinge upon the reader knowing exactly what the main character knows, no more and no less. So, also I suppose partly helped by that is the fact that The Man with Two Shadows is written in the first person, whereas the Laputan Factor is in the third person. But, yeah, in the Laputan Factor, as you'll quickly find out, the main character knows next to shit all about the current circumstances, and neither does the reader. So the reader learns as Nige and Kovac learn. In this book, The Man with Two Shadows, the main character, Jeremiah, again, he knows little about his circumstances, but he does have a rich backstory, and so it takes time to establish that and teach the reader, exactly what's going on. So, as I said, the pacing and the perspective and everything, that's kind of all tied into making sure the reader knows what the main character knows and nothing else, because you never see things that the main characters don't see. You never find out things that they're not supposed to know unless they're the ones finding it out. And there's small details as well, like, for instance, there's a character called Mr. Sobislav, and it's spelled with a W, and Sobieslew, and you might, the average reader might have a moment like mine where I struggled to distinguish between, is it Kovac or Kovac? I mean, in the Laputan Factor, there is a moment where is being told, I don't want you to go back, and then that kind of mutates into Kovac. He's being told to wake the fuck up, and I thought, well, it's not too much of a stretch to, go back, Kovac. Like, I thought maybe that would be a logical progression, but whereas in Man with Two Shadows, Jeremiah actually does write down, he even specifies after a telephone call with Mr. Sobislav that he writes down phonetically so that he can remember how to pronounce Sobislav's name, indirectly teaching the reader everything that he knows. As it's part of this idea of the reader and the main character shared knowledge, neither keeping secrets from the other. And that's very much to the credit of the writing style, to the pacing, to everything. Anyway, on with the video, because Lord knows post-production Tess has rambled on long enough, as you were. But this one builds up more slowly rather than dropping you straight into the action. And that's to both books' credit, because, like I said, they both have different stories that operate on different frequencies, as it were. So if this were to start with action immediately, or if the Laputan Factor were to start slowly and build up, then that wouldn't be quite as good as the way around that it is. Now, one, I dare say, elephant in the room that I might need to address is, technically this is also furry literature, although not to the same degree as the Laputan Factor, because the Laputan Factor is just 100% furry everything, whereas this actually starts off in, if not this world, then a world comparable to it, a world full of humans, animal hybrids kind of aren't a thing, but then about halfway through there's this introduction of the aforementioned other world with the therianthropes, what are essentially furries, and so the way that that's introduced, and because the main character Jeremiah has no prior knowledge of furries, essentially, the book is an absolutely excellent introduction to someone who doesn't perhaps understand what it is or what it means to be furry, and so it's a good introduction to anyone who has an open mind, who is willing to learn, even if they're not necessarily part of the community, someone who's willing to understand it a bit better. This is a good introduction to that. I mean, it's going to teach anyone a lot better than just a quick Google search, which is going to be bound to be full of results that say, oh, no, furries are all perverts, it's nothing but porn, or something equally stupid. And once again, to the credit of this book and the Laputan Factor, yes, it's furry, no, it's not smut. Like, there is not a single page of smut in this book. I mean, there's implications of romance, and yes, a fair few of the characters actually are LGBT, or, well, just straight up gay, actually, but representation, it's a good thing. But it's not, I've mentioned before, just see for reference my July vlog on how much to the credit of the entire furry community it is to have these excellent pieces of literature that also don't feel it necessary to lapse into smut just because sex sells, because that would actually be to the detriment of both the story and also the image in general. Overall, I feel like what I've been saying is kind of once again just me ranting positively about this book, but certainly to anyone who isn't familiar with the furry world and follows my videos, I recommend reading this before reading the Laputan Factor, just to introduce oneself to the whole concept, especially to people such as my mother and Europe's Gallo 8, both of whom I think have a vague awareness of furries but don't fully understand the concept, and so they're not part of the community, they just know of its existence to one extent or another. yeah, it's a fantastic introduction to that. Once again, it's just as well-paced and beautifully written as the Laputan Factor. I think, once again, if I have to pick out if I had to nitpick any negative detail at all, and once again, that might just be me trying to find fault just so I can have some semblance of balance to this review, even though actually there's not that much to criticize. Perhaps one could say that, like the Laputan Factor, the ending, like it speeds up towards the end. I don't know. Although I will say, without revealing too much, the main showdown of the book, the huge, I hesitate to say climax for the aforementioned reasons to do with smut and double entendres and whatnot, but the fact that the main climax of this book is more or less just weaponless, like it's a fight without a fight, and that in itself is a credit to just literature in general, to not just detective thrill novels, but to this sort of this umbrella category of genre at all. The fact that, yes, there's quote-unquote the bad guy, and yes, they need to be stopped, but it doesn't end in a fight. There's no huge, firefight with guns or magic or swords or anything like that. I mean, there is magic in there, it's relatively low fantasy, but it doesn't end with violence. I mean, it ends with threats of violence, but it just... The point is, violence isn't what wins the day. And that's a credit to writing in general, actually. I don't know how much I can say without either repeating myself or making redundant points or whatever, or just waffling without meaning, but really, it's just... To anyone who's either has a passing curiosity in furriness and wants to know more about it from I would say an impartial source, from a source that paints it in a positive light without any of the stereotypes and negativity, or anyone who's just interested in, detective fiction or low fantasy, magic, parallel worlds, alternative histories, that kind of thing, it's all there. It's a really good read. Like, much like the Laputan Factor, whether you're furry or not, it's more than accessible, and it's certainly worth your while to read. And so, as I did with the Laputan Factor, I'll put links to probably either Amazon or wherever else you can buy this from in the video description, or wherever that happens to be at some point in the future, because I know YouTube does like to move shit around. But yeah, I'll put links to where you can buy this, and I do recommend buying it. As I said, if you're going to read the two books I've recommended so far, then do read this first. I'm not sure what else I can say. I can just summarize. Once again, Tristan is a huge, huge credit to the furry community. As communities go, the furry fandom as a whole should feel privileged that he's a member of it and is able to produce this sort of thing. Yeah. I can't think of any way to summarize it other than excellent introduction to furries to those who aren't familiar with it, and also an excellent story regardless. Doesn't rely on smut because it shouldn't have to, and it doesn't. And just, yeah, it's good. It's a bit, like I said, a bit more slower paced than Laputan Factor, but that works with this genre. And you can see me waggling my fingers because I put the book down there in case you're wondering. I'm pointing at the book dramatically and you can barely tell because of how I've framed this video. But I think I've made my point several times over, and with several identical points that are just redressed in different word choices. I've gone on for too long, but the point is, I like this book, and I highly recommend it. And that's not just me being a fanboy over Tristan, he is genuinely a really talented writer. I should probably stop before I make any more redundant points. So I have been and will continue to be Tessellating Hexagons, and I might do more book reviews in the future. And I promise it won't just be Tristan stuff that I review. It's just, he's really good. So see you in whichever of my videos you happen to choose to watch next. Bye-bye.